Hey everybody, this is Bryce here at Warm Audio, and I want to fill you in a little bit today about the brand and what we do. I also got a couple new products to talk about that are pretty exciting. To give you an overview of who Warm Audio is and what we're doing, I'm a recording enthusiast. I recorded myself and other bands in the late 90s, early 2000s. I've always been a big fan of just classic rock, classic music, vinyl collecting, and analog tone. When I started Warm Audio, it was actually because I was seeking better tone in my personal recordings and the recordings that I did for other people. And a lot of the equipment that was available or that was affordable to me just wasn't giving me that sound that I knew I wanted, that I knew my clients wanted, etc. The first time I plugged into a high-end preamp, my microphone sounded like $1 million. It was a cheap $200 microphone, and all of a sudden it sounded like a professional recording. At that moment, I knew preamps mattered. Warm Audio's mission is to make that type of sound available to everyone. As I researched into the types of products that were used on some of the greatest recordings of all time, I realized I could not afford those microphones, I could not afford those preamps, and so started taking them apart, looking at how they're built, finding component suppliers that would give a similar sound and tone to those products, and then building our own products. So our first product was the WA-12 mic preamp, and then from there we've released compressors, equalizers, microphones, DI boxes, and so forth. So one of the products that I'm really excited about that we're releasing is the WA-MPX and the WA-2-MPX. And these are tube preamps. They're loaded with gain. They've got 90 dB of gain, 300 volts of raw power. They've got Cinemag input and output transformers. They are built just like the originals. And this is based on the circuit from 1958 called the 351. It was a tube preamp used in a tape recorder. Some of the famous artists that used this preamp were Les Paul, Elvis Presley, Nat King Cole, Roy Orbison. So it's a really great late 50s sound. And this was one of the best tube preamps of that era. For the longest time, all recordings were done in real time. There was no overdubbing. The very first overdubbing was actually called sound-on-sound recording. And Les Paul was the first to pioneer it. He not only pioneered it, but he did it before the technology even existed to record that way. So he had two tape recorders, and what he'd do is he'd record his guitar to a single tape recorder, and then he'd play that tape to another tape recorder, and his wife, Mary Ford, would sing over it. And then he'd play the guitar and vocal back to the other tape recorder and throw on another guitar part. So in 1952, before the first multi-track tape recorder even existed, Les Paul and his wife Mary Ford released a song that had 12 guitar parts and 12 vocal parts. Just really fascinating to, to see the pioneers use what they had available to pave the way for how we end up recording today. These preamps are really special because they're built in a way that no one really builds tube preamps anymore. You can buy lots of tube preamps on the market. Some are very expensive, some are really affordable, some are extremely cheap actually. And we wanted to build a tube preamp that was built the way you'd expect a vintage tube preamp to be built. We use Cinemag transformers in this design. So the input and output transformer are made here in the USA in actually Simi Valley, California. And I'm a huge fan of transformers. I actually think that the best tube preamps also have signal transformers. Signal transformers add a tone, a weight, a heft to the signal as they run through them. You get the tubes then added in additionally. You're just getting wild amounts of character and just exciting tone from this circuit. I want to talk about the gain too. 90 dB of gain is kind of wild. Most people don't need 90 dB of gain. Why was the original design that way? So it was designed back in the era where ribbon microphones were being used, and those required a lot of gain. The output on ribbons is very, very low. But it is nice to have it available. There might be a time where you're using a low output dynamic mic, low output ribbon mic, you have it far away from a source or in the room, and your preamps just simply will not be able to give enough gain to that microphone to have it hit the interface or computer recording properly. So having all of that gain available is awesome. All that gain, though, it has to come from somewhere, right? So it comes from the input transformer. That's stepping up the gain. It comes from the 3 tubes in the circuit. Well, now what's happening is the gain is creating the analog tone, the analog character. You have to use these vintage components to get all of that gain. So I actually like using this, even if I don't need all 90 dB of gain. I leave it in the high gain setting because I just love the character that all of these components add to the sound. These are a very stable preamp, though. They have a feedback winding. It's a push-pull type circuit. It doesn't distort super easily, which is great. So you can get extremely clean tone. If you just want a lot of gain, you want that tube essence, but you don't want it to overly color your signal, you're going to get that. You can also, though, start flipping on certain switches and features that are going to give you even more character, more color. So let me give you some examples. First switch that we have on it that I love is the tone switch. And we have that on all of our preamps. We call it tone because we don't want people to look at it as an input impedance switch, which is what it is. We want them to look at it as a switch that can modify their tone. Don't worry about the impedance of your mic. Plug it in, try the different options for the impedance and see what you like. Treat it as a tone switch. So when you flip the tone switch up, it's gonna sound a little bit more analog. If you turn it to the high gain setting, it's going to use all the triodes in the tubes, and you are going to hear a little bit more of the tube character. So there you go. You've got the tone switch, the high gain setting, and that's going to add character. Then what about driving the tubes? So you turn up the gain really high to where it's starting to get to a saturation point. You can get some color and some tone from that too. And then lastly, we said that's not enough. Let's add another feature that allows you to add some character and tone, and that would be the tape saturation feature. And what this does is it adds harmonic distortion. It adds a natural compression that sounds similar to recording to tape. And this is a tape era tube preamp. We want you to feel like you can get a tape era sound out of it. Why is the world obsessed with analog tone? I know I am because it just sounds great. It sounds musical. When music is played through equipment that sounds musical, that has a tone to it, it's more enjoyable to listen to. And for the longest time, recording equipment was trying to achieve more and more clarity. And then there became a point, which I think kind of hit in the early 2000s, where, wow, everything sounds really clear. And it doesn't sound as good. It doesn't sound as musical. There was even a time in the late 80s when people were throwing away tube preamps and tube equipment that was very expensive because they just assumed the world had gotten past tubes. Who would want those things anymore? And I find it so fun and exciting that the world is reverting back to and getting into analog recording again. The price points on these are just unbelievable for what's included in the box. If the history wasn't there, if Les Paul being involved with this brand and being one of the first to use the 351, if that wasn't even part of this product story, these would still be really exciting because the amount of value, gain, voltage, everything you're getting for the price is just absurd. But on top of that, when I plug in, I just feel like I'm getting to go back to those days of analog recording. I'm getting that sound, and everybody that's tested it so far is giving us the same feedback. So it's really exciting. This furthers our mission as a brand at Warm Audio to make the unobtainable now obtainable, and we look forward to hearing what you think about it. These are available for purchase right away.